The listing had been up for months. Old lakeside cabin. Needs repairs. $600 or best offer. Most people scrolled past it without a second thought. But when Jack Turner saw it, he stopped. It wasn't the price that caught his attention, though that helped. Retired life didn't pay much, and the small pension from his time in the army barely covered the essentials. It was the photo. The cabin stood by a mist-covered lake, half hidden behind birch trees. The wood was weathered gray, the roof bowed slightly, and the windows had long lost their shine. But there was something about it, something quiet, untouched, peaceful. After everything he'd been through, 2 tours overseas, a bad knee, a failed marriage, and the long, hollow quiet of nights spent alone, Jack wanted peace. And so, on a chilly October morning, he packed up his old truck, loaded a few essentials, and drove north with his dog, Max, riding shotgun. Max wasn't much to look at, a black and tan shepherd mix with scars that told stories Jack didn't ask about. He'd found him 3 years earlier behind a gas station dumpster, ribs showing, eyes cautious but hopeful. The local shelter had said he was a tough case, but Jack just chuckled. "Yeah, me too, buddy," he'd said. They'd been inseparable ever since. Now, as the truck rattled along the dirt road toward the lake, Max's nose pressed against the half-open window, sniffing at the pine-scented air. His tail thumped against the seat every time Jack looked his way. "You're gonna like it out here," Jack said. "Plenty of room, quiet, no neighbors, just you, me, and the water." Max woofed once, as if in agreement. The road narrowed until it became little more than 2 muddy ruts winding through tall grass. When the cabin finally came into view, Jack pulled the truck to a stop and just stared. It was smaller than it had looked online. The porch sagged, and a shutter hung loose on one hinge. The paint had long faded to the color of driftwood. But the lake beyond sparkled in the pale afternoon light, and the wind through the birches sounded like a whisper. Jack felt something in his chest loosen, the first easy breath he'd taken in years. "Well, Max," he said, stepping out and stretching his bad leg. "Home sweet home." Max jumped down beside him, nose to the ground, sniffing every inch of the place. His ears twitched, his tail flicked, but something about his movements made Jack pause. "Hey," he said softly. "What's up?" The dog had stopped near the porch, staring at the cabin door. His body had gone still, muscles tense. A low rumble started deep in his throat. Jack frowned. "Relax, boy. Probably just smells old wood or a raccoon." But Max didn't move. His eyes were fixed, unblinking. Jack followed his gaze to the door. It hung slightly open, swaying gently in the wind. "I thought the realtor said it was locked," he muttered. He reached for the handle, rusty, cold, and stiff, and pushed the door open. The hinges screamed in protest. Inside, the air smelled of dust, pine, and something faintly sour, like wet cloth left too long. The sunlight through the window illuminated floating specks in the air. The furniture, a rickety table, 2 chairs, a small couch, sat covered in a fine film of age. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, just old. Still, Max stayed on the threshold, hackles raised. Jack sighed. "All right, I get it. You don't like surprises. Neither do I." He crouched down and rubbed behind Max's ear. "We'll clean it up, yeah? Get a fire going. Make this place ours." Max finally stepped inside but kept close, sniffing the corners with quiet intensity. By sunset, Jack had unpacked most of the truck. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, throwing warm light across the cabin walls. Dust motes danced in the glow, and the smell of wood smoke wrapped around him like a blanket. He sat back in the old armchair, a mug of coffee in hand, watching the flames. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like an enemy. Max lay curled on the rug near the fire, one paw twitching in a dream. Jack smiled faintly. "We did good today, pal." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the windows with the soft hiss of rain. The lake shimmered under the moonlight beyond the trees. But then a sound, a faint creak. Jack's eyes lifted toward the ceiling. The sound came again, a slow, dragging noise, like something shifting weight on the floorboards above. He frowned. The cabin only had 1 floor, He glanced toward Max. The dog was awake now, not moving, but staring toward the far wall. His ears were forward, eyes sharp, every muscle alert. "Probably the wind," Jack said under his breath. But Max didn't relax. His tail was stiff, his body tense, his gaze locked on something Jack couldn't see. Jack set his mug down, the sound louder than he meant it to be. "You hearing that too?" Max's low growl answered. The hairs rose on the back of Jack's neck. He stood, grabbed the flashlight from his duffel and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dim cabin, landing on the far wall. A narrow door, half hidden behind a bookcase. He hadn't noticed it before. "What the hell?" he muttered. Jack stepped forward. Max followed, silent but close, his eyes never leaving the door. The handle was cold. Rust flaked under his fingers as he turned it. The hinges gave a long, tired groan as the door creaked open, revealing a narrow set of stairs leading down into darkness. A cold draft drifted up from below, carrying with it the faint smell of earth and something else. Something metallic. Max began to bark, sharp and loud. Jack shone the flashlight down the steps. The light disappeared into the black. He swallowed. "All right, buddy," he said quietly. "Looks like we've got a little more to this place than we thought." Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Jack Turner didn't feel alone. Neither did his dog. But Max knew something Jack didn't yet. Something about that cabin, that door, and the shadows that waited below. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. Jack stood at the top of the narrow staircase, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. He'd faced things before, worse things. But there was something about this silence, this breath of cold air rising from the dark, that felt wrong. The stairs disappeared into blackness. No walls were visible. No light switch. Just the hollow sound of dripping water somewhere below. Max barked again, sharp and uneasy, his paws planted firmly between Jack and the stairwell. "It's all right, boy," Jack said, though his voice didn't carry the conviction he wanted. "Just a cellar, probably where the old owners kept firewood or something." But Max didn't move. His ears were back, tail stiff. Jack exhaled slowly. He'd spent years telling soldiers not to let fear control their actions. Now, he'd be damned if he let a creaky old cabin get the better of him. He patted Max's head. "Stay here." Then he stepped forward. The wood groaned under his boots as he descended, one cautious step at a time. The air grew colder with each breath, heavy with damp and age. When the beam of his flashlight finally met the floor, he saw uneven dirt, patches of stone, and a few broken jars glinting in the dust. It wasn't much of a basement, more like a crawl space. Low ceiling, roots pushing through the walls, and shelves lining one side. Shelves filled with jars, old tools, and what looked like toys. Jack frowned. The toys were small. A wooden horse, a doll with a cracked face, a spinning top with faded paint. Dust coated everything. But there was something strange about the way they were arranged. Not piled or tossed, but lined up neatly, like someone had left them there deliberately. He moved closer, shining the flashlight over the shelves. The beam caught on a photo frame lying face down. He turned it over carefully. A family stared back. A man, a woman, and a little girl, maybe 7 years old, all standing by the same lake outside. The cabin looked newer in the photo, freshly painted, the porch whole. But the little girl's eyes, they were wide, almost solemn, like she didn't want to be there. Jack's throat tightened. He flipped the frame over again, and on the back, scrawled in fading pencil, were 3 words. "She never left." A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Then a thump. From upstairs. Jack froze. It was sharp, solid, like a door slamming shut. He turned toward the stairs, flashlight shaking slightly. "Max?" he called. No response. "Max!" He started back up the stairs, faster now, boots hitting the steps with hollow thuds. The flashlight beam bounced wildly, catching glimpses of the ceiling, the rough walls, And then, at the top of the stairs, Max stood rigid, staring into the cabin's main room. His tail was down, body tense, ears forward. "What is it, boy?" Jack stepped out and followed the dog's gaze. The front door, the one he'd closed earlier, was wide open, wind howling through the frame. The fire had gone out. The air was colder now. Jack's pulse picked up. He crossed the room quickly, checking the windows, the door latch, the floor. Nothing looked broken, no footprints on the wet wood. He stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, but fog hung thick over the lake, turning the water into a flat mirror of gray. Nothing moved. Nothing human anyway. A faint ripple passed across the lake's surface, though there was no wind. Then another, like footsteps underwater. Max growled low beside him. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Yeah," he murmured. "I see it too." Back inside, he closed the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and knelt beside Max, scratching the dog's neck. "Okay, we've got two options," he said softly. "Either this place has raccoons and a leaky basement, or it's got bigger problems." Max gave a short, uneasy whine. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." Jack leaned back against the wall, his flashlight flickering weakly in his hand. The photo he'd brought up from the basement sat on the table beside him. He picked it up again, staring at the little girl. Her eyes almost seemed to follow him, and for the briefest second, only a second, Jack could have sworn she smiled. The light flickered again, and somewhere deep below, from the darkness under the floorboards, came the faintest sound. A child's laugh, soft, muffled, and impossibly close. Max barked sharply, leaping to his feet, teeth bared. The sound vanished as quickly as it came. The silence that followed was thick, electric. Jack stood slowly. "All right," he whispered, "whoever or whatever. We're not running." But the truth was, his heart was pounding. Because he'd been in war zones before. He knew what it felt like to be watched. And right now, in that lonely cabin by the lake, Jack Turner wasn't just watched. He was not alone. Morning came slowly, a pale, washed-out light seeping through the cracks in the cabin walls. Jack hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, that faint, childlike laugh echoed in his mind. Max lay curled by the bed, ears twitching with every sound, his breathing shallow and alert. The air smelled of damp ash and old wood. Somewhere outside, a crow cawed, the sound slicing through the stillness like a knife. Jack sat up, rubbing his eyes. "We made it through the night, boy," he muttered. "Guess that's something." Max lifted his head, tail thumping once. Jack stood, stretched, and walked to the table. The photograph from the basement still sat there, the smiling family staring back at him. His eyes lingered on the little girl again, the solemn expression, the faint shadow in her eyes. He turned it over, rereading the words on the back. "She never left." He ran a thumb over the faded letters. Whoever wrote that had meant it. After breakfast, a couple of canned beans and black coffee, Jack decided to get some air. The rain had stopped, leaving the forest dripping and alive with fog. The lake shimmered like glass, unmoving, the surface reflecting the trees around it. Max walked ahead, nose to the ground. Every so often, he stopped, sniffed the air, and looked back as if to make sure Jack was following. "Lead the way," Jack said quietly. They followed a narrow path that curved around the lake's edge. Ferns brushed against Jack's legs. Water lapped softly at the rocks below. The place was beautiful, hauntingly so, the kind of quiet beauty that made your skin prickle, like it was holding its breath. A few minutes in, Max froze. His tail went rigid, ears pointing toward the far bank. Jack followed his gaze and saw her, a girl, standing by the water. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Long dark hair, pale dress that looked wrong somehow, too thin, too clean, like it belonged to another time. Jack blinked. The girl was staring straight at him. "Hey!" he called out, instinctively raising a hand. "You okay? Are you lost?" The girl didn't answer. She tilted her head slightly, then turned and began to walk, not run, into the trees. "Wait!" Jack shouted. He jogged forward, Max barking beside him. But by the time they reached the spot where she'd stood, there was nothing there. Just mist, branches, and the faint sound of the lake lapping at the shore. Jack scanned the area, heart pounding. There were no footprints, not even the impression of small shoes in the damp earth. He turned in a slow circle, flashlight cutting through the fog even though it was daylight. "This isn't funny," he muttered. Max sniffed the ground where the girl had been. Then, tail low, he began pawing at something buried near the rocks. Jack crouched. "What do you got there?" A few minutes of digging revealed a small object wrapped in a rotted piece of fabric. Jack brushed the dirt away and peeled back the cloth. Inside was a wooden toy horse, one of the same kind he'd seen in the basement. Its paint was faded, one leg cracked. He turned it over, and carved faintly on the underside were two initials. "LC." "LC," Jack whispered. "The girl in the picture?" He stared out at the lake again, the fog shifting slowly over the surface. For a second, he could have sworn he saw movement, a ripple that wasn't caused by wind. Max whimpered softly. Jack slipped the toy horse into his jacket pocket. "Come on, boy," he said quietly. "We're heading back." Back at the cabin, Jack spread the photograph, the toy horse, and the old note on the table. Pieces of a story he didn't yet understand. He sat down heavily, elbows on his knees, eyes unfocused. "What happened here?" he murmured. The silence stretched. Then, a creak from upstairs. Max's ears perked immediately. Jack looked up. He hadn't gone up there yet. The staircase at the back of the cabin led to a narrow attic. But he'd avoided it the first day. Too tired, too unsettled. Now, though, curiosity or something deeper pushed him to move. "Stay close," he said, and started up. The steps groaned beneath his weight. The air grew thick with dust and cobwebs, the smell of time and rot. When he reached the top, he pushed open the small door. It swung out with a low squeal. Sunlight filtered through a cracked window, illuminating a tiny room. There wasn't much. A small bed frame, a chest, and a child's rocking chair sitting perfectly still in the center. But on the wall opposite, carved into the wood with small, uneven letters, were words that made his stomach turn. He promised he'd come back. Jack stared, throat tightening. Behind him, the rocking chair creaked. Once, twice. Though he hadn't touched it, Max growled softly. Jack turned slowly toward the sound. The chair was moving, gently, back and forth, back and forth. And there, on the seat, lay a single strand of dark hair, as if someone had just been sitting there. Jack took a step back, heart hammering. Outside, thunder rumbled again over the lake, though the sky was still gray and calm. He looked at Max, then back at the rocking chair. "Okay," he whispered, voice rough. "You wanted me to find you." He looked down at the initials carved into the wall beneath the message, the same two letters as the toy horse. "LC." As he left the attic, the floor creaked beneath his boots. Halfway down the stairs, he paused, one hand gripping the railing. Somewhere below, faintly, he heard it again. That same quiet laugh. Only this time, it wasn't alone. There was another sound beside it, a whisper. And though he couldn't make out the words, he knew one thing for certain. They were saying his name. The night came fast that evening, too fast. The clouds had swallowed the sun before Jack even realized how long he'd been sitting at the table, staring at the little wooden horse. Max lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes never truly closed. Every time the cabin creaked, his ears flicked. The radio on the counter hissed quietly. Static. No music, no voices, just a faint hum that made the air feel alive. Jack had turned it on hoping for noise, something to drown out the silence. But somehow the static felt worse. He ran a hand down his face. "Get a grip," he muttered. "Old cabin, bad wiring, that's all." But his voice didn't sound convincing. The words on the wall upstairs wouldn't leave his mind. He promised he'd come back. The same words, almost, that Ethan Cole had said to the dog at the station in another story Jack once read. He'd laughed then, thought loyalty like that was something only stories had. Now, sitting in this cabin, with the weight of silence pressing in on him and the toy horse lying on the table, he wasn't so sure. Around midnight, the sound came again. Not the laugh. Not exactly. It was a whisper. Soft, drawn out, almost gentle. Like the sound of someone breathing a secret into the cracks of the wall. Jack froze, listening. The whisper came again. This time clearer. He thought he heard a word. Please. His pulse jumped. He stood, every muscle tight, eyes sweeping the shadows. Who's there? He called out. His voice came out rough, shaky. No answer. Only Max's low growl rumbling near his feet. Then scratch, scratch, scratch. From inside the wall behind the fireplace. Jack's stomach turned. The sound was small but deliberate, like nails dragging along old wood. He grabbed his flashlight and aimed it toward the source. If that's a raccoon, you picked the wrong damn wall, he muttered, though his heart was pounding. Max stepped forward, fur bristling. He sniffed at the baseboard, then looked up at Jack, whining softly. Jack knelt beside him, pressing a hand against the wall. The wood was cold, too cold. He listened. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, faintly, impossibly, came a child's voice. Don't go. Jack jerked his hand back like he'd touched fire. He stumbled to his feet, flashlight trembling in his grip. Jesus Christ. Max barked once, sharp, protective. The voice didn't come again. The cabin went still, save for the low crackle of the fire. Jack backed away, breathing hard, and sat down at the table. He stared at the wall for what felt like an hour, the flashlight beam trembling slightly. Eventually, he whispered, "What happened to you, kid?" He didn't sleep that night. By dawn, he had made a decision. He needed to know the cabin's history, not rumors or ghost stories, but facts. Who the family in the photograph was, what really happened to them, and why the name LC seemed to echo through every corner of this place. He drove into town after sunrise, Max in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window. The drive was long and silent, fog hugging the road until the trees gave way to the faded outskirts of the nearest town, a place called Wickford Hollow. The library sat near the old courthouse, small but tidy, its windows glowing with the soft amber of morning light. Inside, a woman in her 60s looked up from behind the counter. "Morning," she said kindly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jack hesitated. "Something like that." He explained, carefully, that he'd bought the old Langford cabin by the lake and wanted to know more about it. At the mention of Langford, the woman's smile faded slightly. "You're staying there?" she asked. "Yeah." She pursed her lips, thinking, "That place has got a long memory." Jack frowned. "Meaning?" She turned toward a row of filing cabinets. "Family used to live there. Father, mother, and a little girl, Lucy. They disappeared about 20 years ago." "Lucy, Elsie." Jack's heart skipped. "You know what happened to them?" The woman hesitated. "Not exactly. Search teams found the parents' car near the main road. Empty. Folks said they might have run off. Money troubles, maybe worse. But no one ever found the girl." Jack stared at her. "Lucy." She nodded slowly. "Lucy Langford. Sweet kid. Used to come into town with her father. Always carried this little wooden toy horse everywhere she went." Jack felt his throat tighten. "That toy," he whispered. The woman gave him a puzzled look. "You found it, didn't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Some say her spirit stayed behind, waiting for her parents to come back. Others say she never left that cabin at all." Jack swallowed. "I think she's still there," he said quietly. "Or something is." The woman looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "If you're staying out there, don't go digging too deep. Some stories don't want to be told again." Jack nodded, but his mind was already turning. He thanked her, took what little he could find, an old newspaper clipping, a record of the property sale, and a faded missing persons notice with a small, grainy photo of a smiling girl holding a wooden horse. Lucy Langford. Back in the truck, he sat in silence, staring at the photo. Max rested his head on Jack's leg, eyes soft, as if he sensed the weight in his owner's heart. "Guess we're not alone in that place after all," Jack murmured. He started the truck and drove back toward the lake. The trees closed in again, the road narrowing until the cabin came into view. Small, lonely, waiting. And as he pulled up to the porch, he froze. The front door was open. He hadn't left it that way. Max leapt out first, barking sharply. Jack grabbed his flashlight and approached, pulse hammering in his throat. The air inside was colder than it had any right to be. Something had changed. The photograph that had been lying flat on the table now stood upright, perfectly propped against the toy horse, and beneath it, scratched into the wood with uneven, small letters, were 3 new words. "He came back." Jack stared, mouth dry. He whispered, almost to himself, "Lucy." The wind blew softly through the open door behind him, and for a split second, just before the light flickered, he thought he heard it again. That small, distant voice. "Thank you." The cabin felt different now. Not just eerie, alive. Jack stood in the doorway, the cold air wrapping around him like a warning. The words carved into the table. "He came back," were still fresh enough to flake at the edges. Whoever or whatever had done it hadn't been gone long. Max circled near the table, sniffing. His tail was low, not tucked, but cautious. Every so often he'd stop and glance toward the fireplace, letting out a quiet whine. Jack followed his gaze. The fire had burned low, little more than a bed of gray ash and glowing embers. But something about the hearth felt wrong. He knelt beside it. The wood beneath the mantel was scorched unevenly, like it had been burned before, long before he ever lit his first fire here. He pushed the ashes aside with the poker, expecting to see stone. Instead, he hit metal, a hollow clank. He froze. "Max," he said softly, "get back." He reached into the fireplace and brushed away the remaining soot. A small metal latch appeared, blackened by years of heat and smoke. He tugged at it. It resisted. Then, with a creak, a square section of the hearth gave way. Beneath it, darkness. Jack grabbed his flashlight, aimed it down. A narrow shaft dropped about 6 feet into the ground. At the bottom was a small space, maybe 4 feet wide, lined with crumbling stone and old wooden beams. A cellar, hidden right beneath him. He hesitated, the old instinct, the one drilled into him from his army days, kicking in. He scanned the perimeter, checked the corners, made sure there was only one way in and out. Then, taking a breath, he lowered himself down. The air was cold and still. It smelled faintly of damp earth and rust. His boots crunched on the dirt floor. His flashlight caught something glinting in the far corner. A box, wooden, nailed shut. He approached slowly, heart thudding. The box was old. Edges rotted, hinges rusted, but someone had tried to seal it tight. He found a crowbar leaning against the beam and pried the lid open. Inside, beneath a folded piece of linen, were 3 things. 1. A small notebook, wrapped in twine. 2. A rusted silver locket. 3. A child's drawing, faded but still visible. Jack lifted the drawing first. It showed a little girl holding a dog by a cabin. Above them, written in a shaky hand, "Me and Buddy." He frowned. "Buddy?" he whispered. Max sniffed the paper, then sat down beside him, ears drooping slightly. Jack opened the locket next. Inside was a photograph of the same girl, Lucy, smiling beside a man and woman who could only be her parents. The mother's arm was wrapped around Lucy. The father's hand rested on her shoulder. But on the back of the photo, in smeared ink, someone had written, "Forgive us. We had no choice." Jack's grip tightened around the locket. No choice for what? He set it aside and untied the notebook. Its pages were brittle, the handwriting uneven, as though written in haste or fear. June 3rd, something's wrong. The power's been out again, and Henry says it's just the storm. But I can see the lights near the woods every night. Lucy says she hears a girl calling her name. Says her name is Elsie. I told her to stay away from the lake. June 5th, the knocking came again last night. Henry checked the door, but no one was there. Just footprints in the ash outside. June 8th, Lucy's horse is gone. She cried for hours. Said she saw Buddy in the woods, but Buddy's been dead for weeks. Jack flipped the page, but the rest was too smudged to read. Only one sentence stood out, underlined hard enough to tear the paper. We shouldn't have opened the cellar. Jack's breath caught. He looked around the cramped space. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening. He whispered, "You were the ones who opened it." Something creaked behind him. He spun, flashlight darting. Nothing. Just dirt, shadows, and silence. Then a faint scuff. A footstep above him. Someone was in the cabin. Jack climbed out fast. Gun drawn this time, his soldier's reflexes fully awake. Max was already growling, hackles up. "Hey!" Jack shouted, scanning the room. "Who's there?" No answer. He moved carefully through the cabin, each step measured. The front door was still closed, but a cold breeze drifted through anyway, like the air itself had found a way in. Then he saw it. Near the table where the carving had been, ash footprints led across the floor. Small ones, like a child's, barefoot. They stopped near the wall, where the old family photo hung crooked and simply ended. Jack felt his stomach twist. No! He pressed a hand against the wall right over the spot. The wood felt different, soft, almost warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. He stumbled back. What the hell is happening in this place? Max barked suddenly, sharp, urgent. Jack turned. The toy horse had moved. It now sat in the middle of the table, standing upright. And beside it, drawn in fresh ash, were 5 words. "She's not alone down there." Jack's flashlight flickered. The cabin groaned. And from below the floorboards came a sound that didn't belong to a child at all. Low, guttural, almost animal. Max snarled, teeth bared. Jack steadied his breath, hand on the pistol, and whispered, "All right, Lucy, who's down there with you?" Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat in the old armchair with Max curled tightly at his feet, both of them staring into the half-dead fire. The locket, notebook, and drawing were spread out on the table in front of him. They looked harmless, but every time Jack's eyes drifted toward them, that voice from the cellar echoed in his head. That growl, that presence. It wasn't human. He tried to rationalize it, wind through the beams, animals under the cabin, maybe the pressure in the old wood shifting as temperatures dropped. He dealt with worse noises overseas. Mortars, sandstorms, gunfire that tore the night apart. But none of those things had ever sounded alive like this did. At 3:27 a.m., Max lifted his head and gave a low growl. Jack froze. "You hear it too?" A faint scratching came from the wall, slow, deliberate, like nails dragging along old pine. Jack stood, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. "All right, that's enough." He approached the far wall, the one with the crooked photo. The scratching stopped. For a moment, only the ticking of his wristwatch filled the silence. Then 3 knocks, soft, rhythmic, right behind the wall. Max barked sharply, breaking the quiet. The knocks stopped again. Jack yanked the photo down. Behind it, wood. No door, no panel, no sign of an opening. But when he pressed his ear against it, he swore he could hear breathing. He stepped back, chest tight. "If you're in there, say something." Nothing. Then a whisper, faint, childlike. "You shouldn't have opened it." Jack stumbled backward. The voice wasn't coming from the wall this time. It was coming from the cellar. He grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the fireplace hatch. Max hesitated but followed, tail stiff, ears flattened. Jack pried open the hatch again and aimed the light down. Nothing moved. Just the same small space, the same old box. "Lucy?" he called. A pause. Then a second voice, deeper, rougher, like someone forcing words through broken glass. "Lucy isn't here anymore." The flashlight flickered violently. Max started barking, frantic now, backing up toward the door. Jack dropped to one knee, hand trembling on the weapon. "Who are you?" The voice came again, this time closer. "She said you'd come back." Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. He stumbled back from the hearth, slamming the latch shut and dragging the heaviest piece of furniture, the table, over it. For a long moment he just stood there, breathing hard, every sense burning. Outside, the wind howled. The cabin's walls moaned with it, the wood flexing like something alive. Max pressed against his leg, whining. Jack knelt and ran a hand through the dog's fur. "It's okay, boy. I'm not leaving you. Not again." But he knew that wasn't true. He couldn't stay either. Not until he knew what he was dealing with. He picked up the notebook again. There were still a few blank pages near the back. But faintly, beneath the ink, he noticed something else. Indentations. Someone had written on the page above and torn it out. He took a pencil and lightly shaded over it. Slowly, the hidden words appeared. "It's not Lucy. She lets it speak through her. If anyone finds this, do not stay after dark. You can't leave the cabin." Jack's throat went dry. The thing, whatever it was trapped inside. He looked around at the shadowed corners, the flickering lamplight, the way the air seemed thicker than before. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. But part of him, the part that couldn't leave things unfinished, whispered otherwise. If Lucy was real, if she was still in there somehow, he couldn't just walk away. The soldier in him needed answers. The man in him needed peace. He took one last look at Max. "We're going to the woods in the morning. If something happened here, someone out there knows about it." As he blew out the lamp, the whisper returned, softer this time, almost pleading. "Jack, don't go." He froze mid-step. That voice, it used his name, but he'd never told it to anyone here. The fire popped once, scattering sparks. Max barked once, twice, and then, from behind the wall, something laughed. A child's laugh. Like, sweet, wrong. Jack gritted his teeth, grabbed his duffel, and sat by the door with Max until dawn. Neither of them slept. By morning, the forest looked almost peaceful again, as if the night hadn't whispered threats through the walls. The sun broke through the mist, spilling pale gold light across the treetops. But even with that beauty, something in the air still felt wrong. Jack slung his pack over his shoulder, gave the cabin one last look, and muttered, "We'll be back, Max. Just need answers first." Max stayed close as they made their way down the narrow dirt path leading deeper into the pines. The forest floor was slick with dew, and every sound, the crunch of boots, the flap of wings, the distant caw of a crow, seemed louder than it should have been. Jack hadn't felt this alert since his last deployment. His instincts were firing again. Scanning, listening, reading the ground. Except this wasn't an enemy you could see. This was something else. Half a mile down, they reached a rusted wire fence, half buried under vines. Behind it stood a small shack, its roof sagging inward, surrounded by the remains of old logging tools. A sign hung crooked on the gate, letters faded but still legible. "Property of the Lockridge estate. Keep out." Jack pushed the gate open. It squealed like a warning. Inside the shack, the air smelled of damp earth and rust. Shelves held old jars and a lantern. On the back wall, nailed crookedly, was a photograph, black and white, cracked with age. It showed a young man in overalls, a woman in a dress, and a little girl between them. The girl held something small and furry, a puppy, white with brown patches. Jack's chest tightened. The same markings as Max. He took the photo off the wall. On the back, someone had written a date. July 1964. Lucy and Daisy. Lucy. He sat down slowly, staring at the image. So the little girl in the drawing, the one from the notebook, had lived here. Maybe even died here. Max nudged his leg, whining softly. Jack looked up. The dog's eyes were fixed on the far corner of the shack. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, standing. In the corner was a wooden crate, half covered with a tarp. He pulled it aside and found several jars filled with murky water, each holding small, pale shapes. Dolls. Old cracked porcelain dolls. Some missing eyes. Some tied with string. A chill crawled down Jack's spine. There was a note pinned to one of the dolls, written in that same looping, childlike handwriting he'd seen before. She said if I gave her my friends, she'd bring Daddy back. Jack stepped back sharply. What the hell? He turned toward the door, but Max growled again, low and steady. Through the cracks in the wall, Jack saw movement. Just a flicker, a shape passing between the trees. He crouched near the window, keeping low. The figure was small, maybe 4 feet tall, wearing what looked like a white dress. It stood just beyond the fence line, motionless. Jack blinked, and it was gone. He burst out of the shack, scanning the woods. Nothing. Just trees and the whisper of wind through the branches. Then a soft giggle echoed behind him. He turned, gun drawn. The shack door was now swinging open by itself, creaking slowly. Inside, the photograph he'd taken from the wall was back where it had been. Except now, the little girl's face was scratched out. Jack's pulse raced. He backed away, grabbing Max by the collar. "We're leaving." They didn't stop until they reached the clearing where the cabin came into view again. The air felt heavier the closer they got. Even the birds had gone silent. Jack unlocked the cabin door and stepped inside. Everything looked the same, the locket, the notebook, the photo on the table. But there was something new. On the wall above the hearth, written in smudged charcoal letters, were 4 words. "She remembers you, Jack." He froze. He hadn't written that. No one had been inside. The chill turned to dread. "Max, we're not alone." The dog barked once, then whimpered, pressing close to his leg. Jack stared at the message, feeling that same cold weight in his chest. There was only one explanation left, one that made no sense but felt truer than anything else. The thing in the cabin knew him, but how? He sank into the chair, staring at the writing until the daylight dimmed again, and the woods outside turned black. The fire crackled low, the shadows lengthened, and from somewhere beneath the floor, a voice rose softly, almost a lullaby. Daddy came back once, but he wasn't the same. Jack felt Max trembling against him. The dog stared at the floorboards, growling deep and steady. Jack swallowed hard, whispering to himself, "Whatever you are, I'm going to find out what happened here. I promise." And in the flicker of the firelight, the charcoal words on the wall shifted, almost as if being rewritten. "Then we'll be waiting." The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of morning where the sun seemed afraid to rise. Mist clung to the cabin like a second skin. Jack hadn't slept. He sat in the chair by the window, still gripping his coffee mug hours after it had gone cold. Max lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head at every creak or whisper from outside. On the wall, the message from last night, "Then we'll be waiting," had faded slightly in the daylight, but it was still there, smeared and haunting. Jack had run his hand over it earlier, hoping it was soot, ash, anything normal. But the texture felt wrong. Chalky, damp, like it had seeped from inside the wood itself. He turned his attention to the photo album he'd found in the cabinet. The first few pages were filled with images of a smiling family. A man in work clothes, a woman in a floral dress, a young girl holding a white and brown puppy. The same faces from the photograph in the shack. But as the pages went on, the smiles faded. The pictures grew darker, both literally and emotionally. Blurred faces, crooked framing, the little girl's expressions turning hollow. One image near the end stopped him cold. The woman, her name written neatly below as Margaret Lockridge, stood on the cabin porch, holding something small and round in her hands. Her face was half lit by the flash, And her eyes looked wrong. Too wide, too fixed. And in the background, faint but unmistakable, someone had scrawled a message on the porch boards. Jack leaned closer, squinting. "She's not your daughter anymore." A chill ran through him so sharply he almost dropped the photo. Max whined softly, ears perked toward the door. The dog's hackles were raised again. Jack looked up. "You hear something, boy?" There was nothing at first, just the sigh of wind through the trees. Then a soft tap, not from the door, from the back room. Jack rose quietly, every instinct screaming alert. He moved down the narrow hall, floorboards groaning beneath his boots. Max stayed close, silent but tense. He reached the bedroom door, the one that had been shut since he moved in. Slowly he turned the knob. The air inside was cold, stale. The curtains were drawn, but a faint light slipped through a tear in the fabric. Dust coated everything: dresser, bed frame, the mirror cracked in two. And then he saw it. On the nightstand sat a photograph in a cracked frame. The same woman, Margaret, holding the same little girl. But someone had pressed deep scratches over the woman's face, as though trying to erase her completely. Next to the frame lay a locket, small and tarnished. Jack picked it up carefully and opened it. Inside were two tiny pictures, one of the girl, one of a man in uniform. The man looked eerily familiar. He frowned. The jawline, the eyes, the haircut. They looked like his. Not exactly, but close enough to stir something deep in his chest. He shut the locket and pocketed it, turning back toward the door, and froze. The mirror, the crack running through it shimmered slightly, as if catching light that wasn't there. And in its reflection, the room didn't look empty anymore. There, standing just behind him, was the woman from the photographs. Her eyes were hollow, her hair hanging in wet strands over her shoulders. Her dress was the same floral pattern, but torn, damp, and dark at the hem. She stood perfectly still, watching him. Jack spun around. The room was empty. He stepped back, breathing hard, every muscle tight. "You're not real," he muttered. "You're just." The mirror shattered. The sound was so sharp it sent Max barking furiously, claws scraping the floor. Shards scattered across the wood, and from beneath them, faint letters began to form in the dust. "Find her." Jack stared. Find who? No answer. Just the echo of Max's growl, low and uneasy. He crouched, brushing aside the dust, and beneath the letters, carved faintly into the wood, was an address. An old one. A town 3 counties over. He stood, staring at it. Whoever or whatever was in this cabin wanted him to find someone. He looked at Max. "Guess we're going on a trip, partner." The dog barked once, short and decisive. Jack grabbed his keys, packed a small bag, and stepped outside. The air was sharp with pine and silence. As he locked the door, he caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the window. The woman again, standing on the porch inside, watching him leave. And just before he turned away, she lifted a hand in a slow, almost pleading wave. The road wound through miles of pine and fog, the kind of backwoods stretch where the radio cuts out and even your thoughts start to echo. Jack drove with the window cracked, the chill morning air creeping in. Max sat in the passenger seat, head out, ears flapping, though even he seemed uneasy. His nose twitching its sense only he could sense. Jack's mind wouldn't quiet. The image of the woman in the mirror, the words "find her," and that carved address. They all spun together into something that felt like both an order and a warning. "Lockridge Town," he muttered under his breath, watching the trees blur past. "Whatever happened there? Someone wants me to see it." The closer they got, the emptier the road became. The asphalt turned to gravel, then to dirt. The trees pressed in tighter. Eventually, the GPS gave up, the screen flashing no signal. By noon, the road ended at a faded wooden sign. Lockridge Town, EST 1892. Population, 47. Except there wasn't a soul in sight. The main street looked like something out of a forgotten photograph. Shuttered stores, peeling paint, a gas pump that hadn't worked in decades. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, then went quiet. Jack parked in front of the only place that looked remotely alive, an old general store with a flickering open sign in the window. He got out, stretching the stiffness from his legs, and Max hopped down beside him. Inside, the air smelled of dust and tobacco. A bell chimed overhead. Behind the counter sat a man who looked old enough to have seen the town built. Gray beard, thick glasses, and eyes that flicked immediately to Max. "Now that's a good-looking dog," the man said, voice rough like gravel. "Don't see many of those around anymore." Jack gave a polite nod. "Thanks. I'm looking for someone. A woman. Maybe her family lived out near the old Lockridge estate." The man's expression stiffened. "You mean the cabin?" "Yeah." He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You're the first fool to ask about that place in years." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Fool? Anyone who goes out there don't come back right," the man said, leaning in slightly. "That land's cursed. Has been since the fire." "Fire?" The old man nodded. "Summer of '68. Lightning struck the east woods. Whole hillside went up. Took the Lockridge house with it. Folks said the mother, Margaret, went mad after losing her husband. Kept the girl inside, wouldn't let her near town. Then one night, poof, flames. When it was done, they only found one body. The mother's." Jack's stomach tightened. "The daughter, never found." He looked down at Max, whose ears twitched at the word never. The man continued, voice dropping low. "Some folks swear they still see her near the tracks. Said she waits for someone, just like her daddy never came back." Jack froze. His throat went dry. "Her daddy?" The man nodded, eyes narrowing. "He was military. Left for duty, never returned. Some say his spirit came back wrong. Others say his little girl kept waiting until she wasn't little anymore." Jack didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, pulse thudding in his ears. The parallel hit too close. A soldier gone, a family left behind, something broken that never healed. "Sir," he said quietly, "do you have any records? Anything from that time?" The man reached below the counter, pulling out a thin folder. "Not much left. Fire took most of it. But there's a photo or two, and a letter." Jack flipped it open. The first picture showed the Lockridge family, same as the ones he'd found. But the second was different. It showed the cabin after the fire. Roof caved in, walls blackened. And on the porch rail, faint but visible, were words scorched into the wood. "He promised he'd come back." Jack's breath caught. The old man tapped the page. "They say she wrote that with her own hands before the fire spread." Jack looked up. "Margaret," the man shook his head. "No, the girl." The air in the store seemed to thin. The walls creaked softly. Jack shut the folder and said, "Thanks. I need to see that house." The old man gave him a hard look. "You don't need to do anything, son. Whatever's calling you out there, you'd best leave it alone." Jack slipped the photo into his jacket pocket. "Can't." The man sighed. "Didn't think so." As Jack turned to leave, the man called out, "Hey, soldier." Jack paused. "If you see her," the man said, voice trembling now, "tell her it wasn't her fault." Jack nodded, unsure if he could keep that promise, then stepped back into the daylight. The town was quiet, not silent, watchful. The kind of quiet that waits for a story to finish. He climbed into the truck, Max jumping in beside him. Jack started the engine. The road ahead led back toward the woods, back toward the cabin, and the truth. But in the rearview mirror, just for a second, he thought he saw her. A young girl in a white dress, standing at the edge of town, waving. When he blinked, she was gone. The forest swallowed sound. Even the hum of Jack's truck faded once. He left the main road and drove deeper along the dirt path. The pines loomed taller here, their black trunks crowding together, branches clawing at the sky like something trying to escape. Max sat alert in the passenger seat, his nose twitching every few seconds. He hadn't barked once, And that was the part that unsettled Jack most. When dogs go quiet, they're not calm. They're reading danger. The road eventually ended at a clearing. Beyond it, half-eaten by vines and years, stood the Lockridge cabin. It looked exactly like the photos and nothing like them at all. The fire had devoured most of the roof, but somehow the frame still stood, stubborn and skeletal. The porch sagged under its own weight. The woods pressed close, too close, as if nature itself wanted the place buried. Jack turned off the engine. The sudden stillness hit him like a wave. "Stay close," he told Max. The dog's tail flicked once. Jack stepped out, boots crunching over old gravel and charred wood. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Old smoke, the kind that never quite leaves a place. He approached the porch slowly, running his fingers along the railing. That's when he saw it, carved deep into the wood, weathered but still readable. He promised he'd come back. The same words from the photo, the same words that had followed him for days. Jack felt a shiver crawl up his spine. He didn't know if it was from the wind or from something older moving through the trees. He crouched, tracing the carving with his thumb. The edges were too clean, too fresh. It hadn't been here for 50 years. It looked carved days ago. "Someone's been here," he whispered. Max growled low, ears pinned. His gaze was fixed on the dark doorway of the cabin. Jack straightened. "You smell something?" The dog's growl deepened. Then a sound. Faint, dragging creak. Like footsteps on rotted floorboards. Jack froze. The wind had stopped. The forest had gone utterly still. He took a cautious step toward the door, hand resting instinctively on the flashlight clipped to his belt. The door hung half open, the hinges whining as it swayed. Jack pushed it gently, the wood groaning in protest. Inside, the cabin was a ruin of time. Walls blackened by fire, ceiling half collapsed, furniture melted into shapes that no longer resembled anything human. Yet in the center of the room stood a single object untouched by decay. A music box. Small, wooden, the kind a child might keep beside her bed. Jack knelt, heart pounding. The lid was half open. He turned the tiny handle once, just enough to wind it. The song that played was hauntingly slow. A lullaby he didn't recognize, the notes fragile and trembling, like the sound of something remembering itself. And then, faintly, beneath the melody, a voice, a whisper impossibly close. He came back. Jack dropped the box. It hit the floor and cracked open, revealing something inside. A photograph, burned at the edges but still visible. A man in uniform, a woman holding a child, and written across the back in looping handwriting, "To Ethan Cole, come home soon." Jack's breath caught. His chest tightened. Ethan Cole. The name from the station story. The soldier the dog had waited for. Jack staggered backward, trying to make sense of it. "No," he muttered. "That's not possible. That was years ago." But the world around him didn't feel like years ago. It felt like the past hadn't left. Max barked suddenly. A sharp, warning bark that snapped Jack back. The dog's hackles were up, teeth bared toward the far corner of the room. Jack turned his flashlight. There, half hidden behind the collapsed beam, was a door. Small, basement level. He approached, each step heavier than the last. The handle was cold, metal slick with rust and something else, damp, maybe, or blood. He pulled it open. A rush of stale air burst out, smelling of earth and old ashes. Stairs descended into blackness. Max whined low, backing away. Jack swallowed. "You don't have to come, buddy." But Max didn't leave. He pressed against Jack's leg, eyes fixed on the dark. Loyal even here. Together they descended. The steps creaked underfoot. The beam of Jack's flashlight cut through the dark, revealing what looked like a cellar, stone walls, shelves, remnants of canned food long gone to dust. Then the light caught something that didn't belong. A small pile of ashes. And in the middle, a locket. Jack crouched, lifting it carefully. Inside were two faces, the same woman and child from the photo. And behind them, Scratched into the metal were words barely visible. "He's still here." A gust of cold air swept through the room. The flashlight flickered. Then, a whisper again, this time behind him. "He promised." Jack spun around, light trembling in his hand. But there was no one there, just shadows. The next morning came with a silence so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. Jack hadn't slept. He sat on the edge of the cabin bed, staring at the locket in his palm. The metal was cold, but not dead, like it carried its own pulse. The faces inside, the woman and the child, seemed clearer now, as if the firelight had burned the smoke away from memory itself. Max lay beside the door, eyes half open, but his body tense. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the window frame, his ears twitched. Outside, the woods stood still. Not even the birds sang. Jack finally stood, slipping the locket over his neck. It rested against his chest like it belonged there. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "We've got a name to follow." The only name he had, Ethan Cole. He opened his laptop, the weak signal flickering to life. After a few searches, he found something, an old newspaper clipping, dated almost 50 years ago. "Fire destroys Lockridge cabin. Soldier missing. Presumed dead." Authorities believe Corporal Ethan Cole perished attempting to rescue his wife and daughter from the blaze. The cause of the fire remains unknown. Jack leaned back, heart pounding. So Ethan had died here. But if he was gone, what was it that Jack had seen last night on the porch? He clicked the next link. A follow-up article appeared, blurry scan, faded ink. Bodies recovered, woman identified as Grace Cole. Child still missing. Jack froze. The daughter was never found. "Find her," he whispered. The same words that had echoed through the cellar. Max lifted his head, tail twitching. Jack packed a flashlight, the photo, and a small notebook into his bag. "We're going back." The forest greeted them with a low wind that moved through the trees like a sigh. Jack followed the path back to the Lockridge ruins, every step heavier with the weight of what he now knew. When he reached the clearing, the cabin seemed even more hollow. The morning light made the charred wood look almost skeletal, like the bones of something that used to live. He walked around to the rear wall, near where the basement door had been. He crouched down, running his fingers through the soot and ashes. There, faint but visible, were footprints. Small ones, too small to be his. Barefoot. The trail led away from the house and deeper into the woods. Jack's throat tightened. "Max," he said quietly, "we've got a trail." The dog sniffed the ground, then began to follow without hesitation. They walked for nearly an hour. The forest grew thicker, the trees older. The deeper they went, the more the air changed, cooler, heavier, almost metallic, like the world had been holding its breath for too long. Finally, the trees opened to reveal a small clearing. In the center stood a stone well, half covered by ivy and moss. The air here felt different, colder, sharper, as if it had been trapped for decades. Jack approached slowly. The stones were blackened, as though scorched by the same fire that had consumed the cabin. Carved into one of them was a single word, Grace, the mother's name. He ran his hand along the letters. "Grace Cole, you're here, aren't you?" The wind shifted, and the sound of distant humming drifted through the trees. A child's voice, soft, off-key. Jack spun around. "Hello." The humming stopped. Then a flicker of movement. In the reflection of the water inside the well, he saw her. A little girl, no older than 8, with tangled hair and eyes too knowing for her age. She was standing behind him, pale as the mist, staring at him through the water's reflection. Jack turned, but the clearing was empty. He looked back into the well. The reflection was still there. The girl tilted her head. Her lips moved, though no sound came. Then, finally, the faintest whisper, "You found me." Jack stumbled backward. "Who are you?" Her image flickered. "I waited." He took a step closer. "Are you Grace's daughter?" The girl didn't answer. She just pointed to the woods behind him. Jack turned, heart racing. There, between the trees, was the faint outline of a cabin, but not the one he'd seen before. This one looked whole, untouched by fire, as if time had folded and shown him the past. The girl's reflection shimmered in the water again, and this time her voice was clearer, layered with sadness and something like hope. He tried to save us, but the fire wasn't the end. Jack's breath caught. What do you mean? She stepped closer in the reflection, her face now inches from the surface. He's still trying. And then her small hand reached up from the water. Jack jerked back as the surface rippled violently, splashing up like something had moved beneath it. Max barked furiously, circling the well, his fur on end. The ripples slowed. The reflection was gone. Jack knelt again, peering into the darkness below. He could see something glinting faintly, metallic, maybe. He pulled a small rope from his bag, tied his flashlight to it, and lowered it down. The beam caught on something, the outline of a small wooden box, and written across the lid, barely visible under the murky water. For him, Jack's hands trembled as he hauled it up. The box was old, waterlogged, but intact. Inside was a folded letter, still legible. He opened it carefully. If you're reading this, it means someone found the truth. Ethan tried to save us, but it wasn't the fire that killed him. It was the thing in the woods, the thing that whispers promises. The words bled into each other near the bottom. Only one more line remained readable. Don't trust the mirrors. Jack froze. He looked down into the water, and for a heartbeat, the reflection that stared back at him wasn't his own. It was Ethan Cole, face scarred, eyes hollow, and his mouth moved soundlessly, forming 3 words. She's not gone. Jack stumbled back, dropping the letter. Max barked again, pacing. The woods seemed to close in around them, the air thick with invisible tension. Jack clutched the locket, breathing hard. Okay, Ethan, he whispered. Then show me. He turned toward the forest, the same direction the reflection had pointed. And this time, when he started walking, he didn't look back. Jack didn't look back at the well as he left the clearing, but he could feel it watching him. The air around him felt different now, thick, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Max trotted at his side, low growl rumbling in his throat, ears twitching with every faint rustle. The sun had slipped behind a veil of clouds, casting the woods in a cold gray that made every shadow look deeper than it should. Jack's flashlight beam wavered across the trees. It's okay, boy, he whispered, though his own voice shook. We're just finding answers. But part of him knew the truth. The answers were starting to find him. After half an hour, the path opened to a small glade. In the middle stood a fallen tree, split in 2 like lightning had struck it long ago. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Old smoke, like the memory of a fire that had never gone out. Jack stopped. The forest was too quiet again. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Then a whisper, soft, breathless, like words carried on the wind. Jack! He spun around, flashlight slicing through the trees. Who's there? Silence. Max growled again, fur standing on end. Jack's pulse quickened. He took a cautious step forward and then froze. There, half hidden between 2 trees, was a figure. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a torn uniform coat. His face was shadowed, but Jack could see the glint of dog tags hanging from his neck. Ethan, Jack breathed. The figure tilted its head. Jack raised the flashlight higher, the beam trembling. Ethan Cole. The man stepped into the light, and Jack's breath caught. The uniform was scorched, blackened at the edges. His face was streaked with soot, eyes dull and hollow. But there was something deeper, not just emptiness. Hunger. Ethan, Jack whispered again. The figure's lips moved, slow, deliberate. You shouldn't have come. Jack stumbled back. What does that mean? The figure's eyes flickered, and for a split second his face shifted. The skin rippled, the features twisting into something wrong. The eyes glowed faintly red before snapping back to human. "It feeds on faith," the figure said. "The waiting, the love, the promises that were never broken." Jack swallowed hard. Feeds on what? But before he could finish, the forest moved. Branches creaked, not with wind, but with weight. Something heavy crawling above. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of wet ash and decay. Max barked furiously, circling, teeth bared. Jack turned and saw movement. Between the trees, a shape tall, almost human, but wrong in every way. Limbs too long, head tilting at impossible angles, eyes gleaming like burning coals. When it spoke, its voice wasn't one. It was many, whispering together like echoes from 100 lost souls. "He never left, Jack. He waited too. Now you've brought it back." Jack stumbled back, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. "Stay away." The thing stepped closer, its face flickering between Ethan's and something monstrous. Its presence pressed against him like static, crawling beneath his skin. Max lunged, barking furiously, snapping at the air. But the thing didn't even flinch. It lowered its head, looking at the dog with something like recognition. "Loyal thing," it whispered. He waited for him too. Jack's mind flashed to the story, the one the townsfolk told about the soldier's dog that never left the station. Ethan Cole's dog. "Oh my God," Jack whispered. "You were waiting for him." The thing's eyes flickered. For just a heartbeat, he saw the soldier beneath. The man who had tried to save his family, who had died in fire, who had promised to return. "I tried to keep them safe," the voice rasped. "But it followed me back. It always follows the ones who love too much." Jack's heart pounded. What follows? The air split with a shriek, high, piercing, inhuman. The thing convulsed, its form twisting violently. "It wants the faithful," it howled. "It feeds on waiting, on hope that never dies." The flashlight flickered, and for a second, the entire forest was full of faces. Pale, flickering, hundreds of them. Men, women, children. All staring from the trees, their mouths open in silent screams. Jack staggered back, nearly falling. Max barked, lunging at the shadows, his teeth snapping at nothing. The soldier's form, Ethan's form, stepped forward again, face flickering between agony and warning. The girl, the fire, it started with her. Jack's breath caught. Grace's daughter? She made a promise too. The ground trembled. Leaves exploded upward as if something was clawing from beneath the earth. Jack turned to run, but a voice, soft and familiar, stopped him cold. "Don't leave me, Jack." It was the girl's voice. He turned and saw her, the same pale child from the reflection, standing just ahead, barefoot, staring up at him. Her eyes were wet with tears. "You found me." Jack took a cautious step forward. "You're Grace's daughter." She nodded slowly. It wasn't the fire. It was the whispers. Behind her, the woods began to twist. Trees bending toward her like they were bowing. Shadows pooled at her feet. "Go," the Ethan thing hissed, "before she remembers what she became." But Jack couldn't move. The girl stepped closer, her expression pleading. "You said you'd stay," she whispered, and for a heartbeat, the forest was gone. Jack was standing in the cabin, but not the burned one. It was whole again. Firelight flickered softly. Grace stood by the stove, humming. A man, Ethan, laughed from the table. And by the hearth, the little girl played with a dog. Jack gasped. "What is this?" The girl looked up from the floor, her eyes full of something ancient. "Home," she said softly. "It always comes back here." The vision began to twist. Fire creeping up the walls, shadows dripping from the ceiling like oil. Grace screamed. Ethan ran toward the stairs. The girl didn't move. She just turned toward Jack. "Help me remember who I was." The world snapped back. Jack was on his knees in the clearing, breath ragged. The well was gone. The forest was dark. And standing in front of him, the girl, pale and trembling, holding out the burned locket. "She's still waiting," she whispered. Then she vanished. Jack was left alone in the clearing, clutching the locket, Max pressing close beside him, both shaking. He finally whispered to the trees, voice raw, "Then we'll find her." And from somewhere in the dark, the faintest reply came, not from a ghost, but from something deeper. "You already have." The wind howled through the forest, carrying with it the scent of smoke, and the faint echo of a dog's bark, distant but familiar, as if it came from another time. Jack barely remembered how he made it back to the cabin that night. His boots were soaked, his hands numb from gripping the locket too tight. The forest behind him seemed to shift with every step. Shapes in the dark that might have been trees, or might have been something else watching. Max stayed close, never more than an arm's reach away, his low growl steady, like a heartbeat in the dark. When they reached the clearing, the cabin looked different. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat rising from a road. Jack stood for a long moment trying to understand what had changed. Then he realized the cabin wasn't burned. The walls were whole again. The porch light glowed a warm amber. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Jack's breath caught. He turned to Max. "You see this too, right?" The dog only stared, tail tucked, ears pinned back. Jack took one hesitant step forward. The crunch of his boots against the gravel sounded too loud. The smell of pine and wood smoke wrapped around him. Comforting, familiar, but it wasn't right. Felt borrowed. He reached for the doorknob. It was warm, and when he opened it, the world shifted. The cabin's interior glowed in soft lamplight. The floorboards gleamed like they'd just been polished. Curtains hung neatly over the windows. On the table by the wall sat a plate of half-eaten biscuits, steam still rising. And sitting by the fireplace, humming quietly, was Grace. Jack froze. "Grace!" She turned, smiling softly. But her eyes, they weren't quite the same. They were a shade too dark, and in their depths flickered faint reflections of flame. "Evening, Jack," she said, her tone calm, familiar. "You shouldn't be out in the woods so late." Jack swallowed hard. You're gone. I saw your house." "I saw." "Gone?" she interrupted gently, still smiling. "No, I've always been here." She rose, dusting her apron, and crossed the room with the easy grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. "You're trembling," she murmured. "Sit down. Warm yourself." Jack didn't move. His gaze fell to the table, to the plate of biscuits that were still steaming. He stepped back. "Grace, this isn't real." For a moment, her smile faltered. Something behind it cracked, like a flicker of pain trying to break through the calm. Then she said quietly, "It was real. Once." Her words hung in the air, heavy as the smoke curling in the firelight. Jack looked around the room. Every detail was too sharp, too alive. A photo on the mantel, a man in uniform, smiling with his arm around Grace. A little girl sitting at their feet, holding a small dog that looked almost like Max. The same locket, now cold in Jack's hand, hung around the girl's neck in the picture. Grace followed his eyes. "You found it," she said softly. "I thought it was lost forever." Jack turned the locket over in his palm. "I found her too," he whispered. Grace's expression shifted. For the first time, she looked afraid. "She spoke to you?" Jack nodded. She said, "You're still waiting." The lights flickered. The air grew colder. Grace's hands trembled. "She shouldn't be here. None of us should." "What happened, Grace?" Jack asked. "What really happened that night?" Grace stared into the fire. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then, in a low voice, "Ethan came home early that night. There'd been a storm, power was out. He was angry, tired, and he saw the light in the woods. He thought someone was out there." She paused, her voice quivering. "He went to check, said he'd be right back. But then the whispers came. I told her. I told my daughter to stay inside." Her hands clenched the edge of the table. "And then the fire started." Jack felt his throat tighten. "You said it wasn't an accident." Grace turned slowly toward him, her face pale as ash. It wasn't. It wanted him. It wanted all of us. But her voice broke. She tried to stop it. She called it by its name. Jack frowned. What name? Grace looked up sharply, terror flashing in her eyes. Don't make me say it. The air in the cabin thickened, as if the room itself was listening. Then, from the corner, a sound. Soft, wet, like something dragging across the floorboards. Max barked, spinning toward the sound, his teeth bared. Jack swung his flashlight, though there was no darkness to cut through. The beam fell on the corner of the room, and the wallpaper there was bleeding. Dark streaks oozed down the wood, pooling on the floor. Grace backed away. It's hurt us, she whispered. Jack grabbed her arm. What is it? Her eyes flicked to the fireplace. It came with the soldiers, she whispered. Ethan brought it home without knowing. It follows grief. It feeds on loyalty that won't die. The locket in Jack's hand burned hot. He dropped it with a cry, and when it hit the floor, the world around him shuddered. The cabin was gone. Only the locket remained, lying in the ashes, glinting faintly in the beam of his flashlight. Max whimpered softly. Jack knelt, picked it up again. It was cold now, and inside the photo was burned away. Only a few words were etched faintly into the metal backing. He will return. Jack stared at the words until they blurred. Then he whispered to the empty room. So will I. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint echo of a whistle, the sound of a train, long gone, but not forgotten. And somewhere deep in the woods, something answered. The storm rolled in by dawn, low and heavy over the valley. Rain came in cold sheets, hissing against the trees and beating on the roof of the half-rebuilt cabin. Jack didn't sleep that night. Not that he tried. He sat by the window, staring out at the gray forest, the locket turning slowly in his hands. Max lay beside him, restless, every so often lifting his head to sniff the air. His fur was damp, his eyes alert. The dog hadn't barked once since the cabin shifted back to ash. He didn't have to. Whatever had woken in those woods, it was still there, watching. Jack whispered to the dog, almost to himself, "It's not over. Not yet." He stood and pulled on his jacket. The map of the property was spread across the table, corners held down by stones and coffee cups. He traced the thin black lines leading out from the cabin to the creek, then to the edge of the ridge where the old railway used to run. That's where it had to end, where it all began. He glanced down at Max. "You with me, buddy?" The dog thumped his tail once, as if to say always. They stepped out into the storm. The forest was alive with sound. Wind roaring through the pines, thunder rolling over the hills. Every step sank into the wet earth. The locket around Jack's neck felt heavier than it should have. He followed the trail that led to the ridge, past the place where he'd first found the burnt cross, past the hollow tree where he'd seen the girl. The woods seemed to twist and rearrange around him, paths folding in on themselves. At one point, he stopped. Max was growling low and deep. Ahead, through the rain, a figure stood by the edge of the path, small, still. The little girl. Her hair hung wet against her face, her dress dark with soot and rain. She was holding something in her hands, a small wooden toy soldier, half burned. Jack's heart thudded. "You came back." She didn't speak. Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw something inside them, sorrow, not fear. She lifted the toy soldier slightly. "He never left," she said softly. The words were barely audible over the storm, but Jack heard them as clearly as if she'd whispered them in his ear. And then she was gone. The rain fell harder. The trees groaned as the wind tore through them. Max barked once, sharply, and bounded ahead, toward the clearing by the ridge. Jack followed, slipping and stumbling through the mud. When he broke through the tree line, he froze. The clearing was filled with light. Not daylight, firelight. It shimmered in the rain, impossible and wrong, like a reflection on water that wasn't there. In the center stood the old railway marker, blackened and twisted. Around it, the air itself seemed to burn. And in the center of the flame, a man stood. Ethan Cole. His uniform was tattered, his skin pale as smoke. His eyes glowed faintly, like embers in ash. He turned slowly toward Jack. "You shouldn't have come," Ethan said, voice hollow and distant. Jack took a step forward. "Grace was waiting for you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She shouldn't have waited. She didn't have a choice," Jack said. "None of you did." Ethan's gaze dropped to the locket around Jack's neck. For the first time, something human flickered in his eyes. "You found it," he whispered. "You brought it back." Jack nodded. "It's the only thing left that remembers you." The air crackled. The ground trembled. Max barked, circling protectively in front of Jack. Ethan looked past him, to the dog, and his voice softened. "He knows what waits on the other side." "Then tell me," Jack said. "Tell me what this thing is. Tell me how to end it." Ethan's expression darkened. "It doesn't end. It only moves. From one grief to the next. From one promise that couldn't be kept." He looked directly at Jack now. "It followed me home. When I couldn't let go." The fire around him flared, and for a moment Jack really saw what stood behind Ethan. Not a man. Not even a shape. Just a presence. A weight pressing down on the air, thick and ancient. A voice whispered through the wind, too deep to be human. "Return what is owed." Jack stumbled back, clutching the locket. "What do you want from me?" The voice whispered again. Not from outside, but inside his head. "You carry his grief. You wear his debt." Jack realized then what the locket really was. Not a keepsake. A tether. A promise unfulfilled. Passed from one lost soul to another. He looked up at Ethan, who was fading in and out of the firelight. "Then let me take it," Jack said. "Let me finish what you couldn't." Ethan's eyes widened. "You don't understand." But Jack had already pulled the locket from his neck and thrown it into the burning light. The sound that followed was not a scream, but something worse. The crack of a world tearing at its seams. The flames twisted upward, the rain turning instantly to steam. Jack shielded his face as the light engulfed the clearing. Max barked furiously, but didn't move away. When it was over, silence fell. The rain had stopped. The clearing was dark again. Ethan Cole was gone. The fire, the locket, everything gone. Only the railway marker remained, still and cold. Jack fell to his knees, gasping. Max pressed against him, whining softly. He reached out, touching the earth where the locket had fallen. It was cool now, and beneath the mud he felt something hard. He dug with trembling hands until he uncovered it. A dog tag. Ethan Cole, Corporal. 3rd Infantry Division. Jack closed his fist around it. "You're free now," he whispered. Thunder rolled one last time over the ridge. But this time it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a salute. Jack stood slowly, rain washing the mud from his hands. He looked out across the forest. Quiet again, still and alive in a way it hadn't been since he arrived. Max nudged his leg, tail wagging once. Jack smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go home." They turned back toward the cabin, the storm finally breaking apart behind them. Morning came slow to the valley. For the first time in months, the air didn't taste of smoke or iron. The storm had passed, leaving behind a soft mist that clung to the grass and drifted between the trees. The cabin stood quiet, half rebuilt, scarred but standing, like its owner. Jack sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee warming his hands. The wood beneath him was damp, the air cool enough to see his breath. Max lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Every now and then, the dog would lift his head and glance toward the woods. Not in fear anymore, but habit. It had been 3 days since the night on the ridge. 3 days since Ethan Cole and whatever haunted this place had finally gone. Jack hadn't told anyone what happened. The locals asked about the lightning that tore through the forest, the fire that burned but left no ash. But he just shrugged and said it must have been the storm. The truth was harder to explain. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the dog tag. Clean now, polished as best he could. The metal caught the light. Ethan Cole, 3rd Infantry Division. Jack ran his thumb over the name. He thought about burying it, maybe by the old railway, but something stopped him. It didn't feel right to put it back in the ground. Ethan had spent enough time buried in silence and regret. So instead, Jack had nailed it to the cabin wall just above the door. A small piece of memory. Not a ghost. Not a curse. Just a reminder. Guess we both needed to come home, he said quietly. Max lifted his head at the sound of his voice, tail brushing against the step. Jack smiled and leaned down, scratching the dog behind the ears. Couldn't have done it without you, buddy. The dog let out a low, happy rumble. The kind that only comes from knowing the worst is behind you. Jack looked out toward the tree line. The sunlight was breaking through now, spilling gold across the clearing. The forest looked different, lighter, like it could finally breathe. For the first time since he'd arrived, Jack felt it too. The strange, heavy weight that had followed him for years was gone. The guilt, the nightmares, the feeling that he didn't deserve another chance. Ethan's story had ended, but Jack's was still being written. He rose, setting the mug aside, and walked to the edge of the porch. Come on, Max, he said. Let's take one last look. The two of them made their way down the trail that wound behind the cabin, through the wet grass and the scattered pine needles. The air smelled clean, alive. When they reached the ridge, the clearing was peaceful. The railway marker was still there, but its surface was smooth now, no scorch marks, no strange symbols. Just old, weathered stone. Jack crouched beside it and set a small wooden carving at its base. A figure of a soldier, carved by hand from a scrap of pine. Rest easy, Corporal, he murmured. You kept your promise. The wind moved gently through the trees, and for a heartbeat, Jack thought he heard a faint voice. Thank you. But maybe it was just the wind. He smiled, stood, and turned back toward the cabin. The dog trotted beside him, head high, tail wagging. As they walked, the mist began to lift completely, revealing the valley below. Green, bright, and open. Jack paused at the ridge's edge, taking it all in. You know, he said to Max, I think we'll stay a while, fix this place up right, maybe even bring some life back to it. Max barked softly, approving. Yeah, Jack said, smiling faintly. We'll call it Redemption Ridge. Has a good ring to it, don't you think? The dog barked again, louder this time, tail thumping against Jack's leg. Jack laughed. All right, you win. They started back down the path, sunlight warming their backs. The cabin came into view, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. As they approached the porch, Jack glanced up at the dog tag above the door. The metal caught the morning light, flashing once like a star before settling again. Jack stopped, one hand on the frame, and whispered, You can rest now, Ethan. We've got it from here. Max pushed his nose against Jack's hand, as if agreeing, and together, man and dog stepped inside, not into a haunted cabin, but a home. The light followed them in, gentle and golden, filling every corner. Outside, the valley was quiet once more, but this time, it wasn't the quiet of grief. It was peace. The end. He bought a cabin for $600, but his dog knew it wasn't empty. A story of loyalty, loss, and finding home, even when you thought you'd lost it forever.